I am a philosophical bachelor, and today I want to talk about Panta Rhei, Heraclitus, who is the father of process philosophy. Given my interest in process philosophy, I thought it apt to visit what little we have from Heraclitus of Ephesus, who flourished around 500 BCE. In Western philosophy, Heraclitus is the first person known to articulate how reality is not in the fixity of the concrete objects we observe around us, but is rather flux or continuous change. As a pre-Socratic, he is part of the philosophical turn, where humankind just began shifting away from myth towards reason. According to Diogenes Laertius, he withdrew from public life to devote himself to philosophy. He was despised by his countrymen, but despised them in turn even more because of the deep sense of perversity of the ordinary ideas and life of his people. He also apparently gave his kingdom to his brother. The state of knowledge then may be expected to be rather primitive, but yet, as we shall see, what the pre-Socratics have to offer can be rather profound. He only wrote one book, possibly entitled The Muses or On Nature, which he deposited at the Temple of Diana. When Euripides asked Socrates for his opinion on Heraclitus' work, Socrates replied that what he understood of it was excellent, and what he did not understand he believed to be as good, but it requires a vigorous swimmer to make his way through it. Laertius also tells us that Heraclitus has been called the riddler, the obscure, and the dark. His reputation for being difficult to comprehend is not helped by how most of his work has been lost, except for what has been quoted by other authors whose texts are extant. This makes any book compiling his words not a coherent and sustained argument, but fragmentary and disjointed. The text I am basing this essay on is translated by William Harris, Professor Emeritus at Middlebury College, in his book entitled Heraclitus, The Complete Fragments. It has defects, but Harris has compiled the fragments according to themes, which I find helpful and hence will follow as chapters in my essay. He in turn took the Greek text from the Diels-Kranz compilation of the fragments of the pre-Socratics, which is considered the standard. The sequence Harris gives to the fragments lends them some coherence, but we should note that this sequence is decided by him, who may not follow the intentions of Heraclitus. Given the sparseness of the text, its aphoristic style, and also the peculiarity of Heraclitus' style, which involves wordplay, his words can be interpreted in multiple ways. I do not claim that my interpretation is right. For some of the texts, I have discussed the interpretation of others. But we may all be wrong. What is more important is that we consider the words and make the mental effort to think through them, taking what is philosophically useful to us, even if it turns out not to be what Heraclitus intended, which in any case we may never know. Heraclitus is known for three ideas: universal flux, the unity of opposites, and fire as arche, the principle or source of all things. While all is in flux according to Heraclitus, he seems to see deep interconnections between science, human affairs, and theology, writes Daniel Graham. Opposing things unite, and everything owes their harmonious existences ironically to conflict. What is good or bad, conflicting or harmonious, is often a matter of perspective. From the elemental fire comes all things, and all things can revert to fire, though some have considered his choice of fire merely to be a metaphor for change rather than an ontology. Yet from these three things comes also the idea of an absolute, a totality, a logos which permeates all things. Is this a cosmic nous, a cosmic consciousness? Heraclitus is self-taught, and we will see in his words that he spurns too much learning, is critical of other thinkers, and values self-contemplation. Who knows how our view of the world and our scientific knowledge would have turned out if his process philosophy had become the main method of the physical sciences rather than the Platonic Aristotelian substance metaphysics which was adopted instead. Process might be too advanced, too hard to grasp at such an early stage of human thought, almost like a baby trying to walk before it has learned to crawl. However, our state of the physical sciences, at least at advanced levels, has indeed begun to shift towards an underlying conception of reality as non-concrete flows such as energy, for instance in the wave-particle duality of matter, of mass-energy equivalence in relativity, and vibrations in superstring theory. The way of the logos. 1. Although this logos is eternally valid, yet men are unable to understand it, not only before hearing it, but even after they have heard it for the first time. That is to say, although all things come to pass in accordance with this logos, man seems to be quite without any experience of it, at least if they are judged in the light of such words and deeds as I am here setting forth according to its nature and to specify how it behaves. Other men, on the contrary, are unaware of what they do when awake, as they are when asleep. Heraclitus tells us that there is an eternally valid truth, though this truth is difficult to comprehend. Even when it has been demonstrated over time, we may be quite unable to understand it. 2. We should let ourselves be guided by what is common to all. Yet, although the logos is common to all, most men live as if each of them had a private intelligence of his own. One way to get at this truth is to find what forms the basis of everything, which G.W.F. Hegel interprets as sort of a cosmic consciousness, or at least a consciousness of the universal, a contemplation of things in the guise or under the aspect of eternity, borrowing the later phrase from Baruch Spinoza. That is one way of understanding the term common. Another way of understanding common is what everyone knows, what is commonly known. This will be an appeal to our intuition, from our common intuition about things to arrive at a foundational principle and have that as the basis of knowledge, as opposed to just our own unfounded opinions. 3. Men who love wisdom should acquaint themselves with a great many particulars. To get at the general truth, we will need to know a lot about particular specific things in order to derive what is common to them all. 4. Seekers after gold dig up much earth and find little. We may have to undergo a lot of effort just to find a small but valuable nugget, which will be the logos or the foundational principles of all knowledge. Heraclitus' epistemology is foundationalism, where he believes that such foundational principles indeed exist and that we are able to know it. 5. Let us not make arbitrary conjectures about the greatest matters. We must be careful in formulating our theories to have them be coherent with our experience and consistent internally, since we are after all pursuing a great and important project of gaining understanding. 6. Much learning does not teach understanding. Otherwise, it would have taught Hesiod and Pythagoras, Xenophanes and Hecataeus. 7. Of those whose discourse I have heard, there is not one who attains to the realization that wisdom stands apart from all else. Yet knowledge is not wisdom. We can learn facts, but that does not mean a true or adequate comprehension of what matters. Heraclitus goes so far as to single out the leading authorities of knowledge in his day for criticism. They are learned men, but in his eyes they lack understanding. They spend too much time in collecting information and not enough in grasping its meaning, adds Graham. 8. I have searched myself. Learning from others and external sources such as texts and books is not enough. We also have to contemplate within ourselves, to think deeply ourselves. We should give time to learning from others, be they teachers or books, but also time to doing the thinking ourselves and not just imbibing the thoughts of others. 9. It pertains to all men to know themselves and to be temperate. As what was inscribed on the gates of the temple of Apollo in Delphi, know thyself. And when we do, we will come to the realization that a middle way of temperance, of moderation, is a good way to conduct ourselves. 10. To be temperate is the greatest virtue. Wisdom consists in speaking and acting the truth, giving heed to the nature of things. Such temperance will be later expounded by Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, for instance being neither too cowardly or too reckless, but instead just being courageous. Buddha also teaches the middle way, where he realized himself that the way to live is neither too luxuriously or too ascetically. Either extreme causes suffering. The translation Graham used writes, "Sound thinking is the greatest virtue and wisdom, to speak the truth and to act on the basis of an understanding of the nature of things." It does not claim temperance to be the greatest virtue, but sound thinking, which fits better with the second sentence on wisdom. To think in a clear and logical manner is certainly valuable. Wisdom is related to truth, not just to have a mental knowledge of it, but to communicate truth to others and to act in the way of truth. Part of knowing the truth is to comprehend nature. We should understand nature here to mean reality and not merely flora and fauna. Part of knowing the truth is hence to find out how reality is, and then act accordingly as opposed to acting on the basis of falsehood, habit, or superstition. To act according to truth would then be to act rationally. 11. The things of which there can be sight, hearing, and learning, these are what I especially prize. From our senses, the thoughts of our teachers, books, and experience, we can learn a lot. Yet we should remember that learning is valuable, but as he tells us in Proposition 6, understanding what we learn is paramount. 12. Eyes are more accurate witnesses than ears. 13. Eyes and ears are bad witnesses to men having barbarian souls. The ancient Greeks calls anyone other than Greeks barbarians. A literal reading of the statement is that foreigners who do not understand the language will not be able to receive the information disseminated in signs, writings, or through speech. But I prefer a less direct reading. While our senses can tell us a lot about our reality, we have to also refine ourselves spiritually, just like we will have to learn the Greek language if we want to read a Greek text or listen to Greek radio. For instance, our senses can give us sensual pleasures, and if we are brutes, our senses may mislead us to chase after such sensual pleasures. We need also to refine our souls in order to correctly interpret the information from our senses so as to act properly. 14. One should not act or speak as if he were asleep. 15. The waking have one world in common. When asleep, our thinking and our senses are likewise asleep, and we are immersed in our subjectivity since no one else can know what we are dreaming. To understand reality and to know the truth, we need to be awake so that our senses and faculty of thought are also awake. When awake, we can have an objective view of reality, which is also the same view that others have. 16. Death is what we see when awake. When we are asleep, it is dreams. My initial interpretation was, what do we see when we are awake? What reality is? May be unpleasant, but it is at least real, unlike dreams. We of course also see life when awake, so why does Heraclitus write death? If we are able to understand what is most unpleasant to us, then we surely are able to understand what is less repulsive. We need to know it all, the good and the bad. My more considered interpretation is that since all things are changing, they are in a way dying since they are becoming different. which is what we will see of everything in our waking state. Hegel explains that when we are awake, our power of consciousness is connected to the universe, which is always changing, but when asleep, we are disconnected, hence losing our power of consciousness and hence our objectivity, becoming irrational. 17. Nature loves to hide itself. To attain the truth is difficult because the truth may not be apparent. Truth is not just on the surface of what we perceive. It may be hidden and require much unearthing to get at a small nugget of truth, as Heraclitus tells us in Proposition 4. Reality is likely to be complex, not simple. 18. The Lord, whose oracle is at Delphi, neither speaks nor conceals, but gives signs. The temple of Apollo at Delphi was where supplicants go to receive prophecies from the oracle, who are prophets of the gods. The oracles are renowned to not speak in a straightforward way, instead delivering hard-to-understand riddles. Nonetheless, the prophecies, while indirect, are not deceits. They, however, require interpretation to get at their truth. Likewise, nature or reality does not tell us plainly what to believe, though it does not make false pretenses either. Instead, it is there, and we have to make the effort to discover the truth about it. 19. Unless you expect the unexpected, you will never find truth, for it is hard to discover and hard to attain. We may need to change our paradigm from the way we have understood things to be open to what we did not foresee in order to get at the truth. Heraclitus will probably be familiar with the ostensive simplicity and intuitiveness of substance metaphysics, of things as stable objects. He recognizes the difficulty of his doctrine of flux, and yet, unless we are ready to consider less intuitive ideas, we will not be able to penetrate through to the truth of reality, which is process rather than substance. Plato is in part reacting to Heraclitus' challenge when he proposed his theory of forms. For how can we know of a thing if it's constantly changing, the way earthly things constantly change? Hence we need a form which is eternally unchanging. We can gain knowledge of that form, which he postulates to exist in the realm of forms. Plato regards the forms as real, while the instantiations of the forms we encounter in the world are false. Other thinkers argue that to speak of change, there must be some fixed and unchanging substrate on which can be superadded change or what is merely accidental to it. Process philosophy rejects these positions. Everything is process, and what we call solid and concrete is merely a stable process. There exists no unchanging substrate. Everything is process through and through. Another pre-Socratic, Parmenides, developed a philosophy of radical monism and stasis, where there is only one solid spherical thing which is completely homogeneous and contains no movement, itself not moving. We do not know if he is reacting to Heraclitus. However, later thinkers will have to deal with the formidable logic of both arguments. Graham comments that Plato seems to have used Heraclitus' theory, as interpreted by Cratylus, as a model for the sensible world, as he used Parmenides' theory for the intelligible world. The idea of the continuum. 20. They do not step into the same rivers. It is other and still other waters that are flowing, and souls take their spirit from the waters. 21. You cannot step twice into the same river, for other waters and yet others go ever flowing on. They go forward and back again. The waters are continuously changing as a river flows, making each time you step into the river a step into a different set of waters. In that way, the river itself is changing, and you are likewise changing. Reality is in flux, and a fortiori, flux is also taking place in the person who is experiencing flux. This explains the advance made by Cratylus that Heraclitus is wrong to say that one cannot step into the same river twice, since in fact, we cannot even step into the same river once. To speak of things as concrete is at best a close approximation. What we consider a discrete event is in fact a continuous movement. To speak of an I or a you is mistaken if we understand them to be concrete, since the person of a moment before is not the exact same person as the moment after. So we cannot step into the same river once, because there is no unchanging river to step into, if by river we mean something fixed. There is also no person doing the stepping, since the person is also likewise not fixed but constantly changing. How can one grasp something constantly changing? This is the precise dilemma Plato faced and responded to by formulating the realm of forms. Graham offers an alternative reading. What is a river if not for its flowing waters? If its waters are still, it is not a river but a lake or pond. A river is a remarkable kind of existence, one that remains what it is by changing what it contains, he notes. He explains, some things stay the same only by changing. Constancy and change are not opposed but inextricably connected. We consider ourselves the same person even though our cells are continuously shedding, such that not a single cell in our bodies are the original ones after some years. Heraclitus believes in flux, but not as destructive of constancy. Rather, it is, paradoxically, a necessary condition of constancy, at least in some cases and arguably in all. In general, at least in some exemplary cases, high-level structures supervene on low-level material flux, adds Graham. Supervenience may be one way to reconcile substance metaphysics with process ontology. Incidentally, the Greek phrase most attributed to Heraclitus, Panta Rhei, meaning everything flows, is not actually said by him, but attributed to him by Simplicius 1000 years later. 22. Cool things become warm, the warm grows cool, the moist dries, the parched becomes moist. What was once in a particular state does not remain in that state, perhaps switching even towards the opposite state. 23. It is in changing that things find repose. Intellectually, we need to change our conception of the default state of things from static to dynamic. Things are normally changing, and it is within change that stillness even exists. 24. Time is a child moving counters in a game. The royal power is a child's. Harris suggests that if we consider the child to refer to one who is not a master at chess, then if time is like that child as Heraclitus tells us, time is then an erratic player in the game of life. And if by royal power, Heraclitus is referring to the power of checkmate in chess. Fickle and erratic time has great power over us. Hegel interprets Heraclitean time as the abstract representation of process, of all flow, all movement, all becoming. He writes, time is pure becoming, and suggests that time may be a better arche for Heraclitus than fire, though fire is also very good since it is a process and not quite a substance. Fire is physical time, absolute unrest, absolute disintegration of existence, the passing away of the other, but also of itself, Hegel adds. War is both father and king of all. Some he has shown forth as gods and others as men. Some he has made slaves and others free. Heraclitus lived in the time of war. He was from Ephesus, a city of Ionia inhabited by Greeks like himself, but under Persian rule. While it is not known if he is a soldier or is somehow involved in warfare, since little is known about him, he suggests that war and strife in general are ennobling and reveal people's true character. Some will be shown to be heroes, while some will be shown to be slaves. 26. It should be understood that war is the common condition, that strife is justice, and that all things come to pass through the compulsion of strife. 27. Homer was wrong in saying, "Would that strife might perish from amongst gods and men." For if that were to occur, then all things would cease to exist. In international relations and political theory, Heraclitus would be considered a realist. He accepts that power struggle is an inevitable part of nature, not just in human beings but across the animals, and thus try to consider what war and strife possibly can be good for. Nonetheless, Heraclitus seems to be talking about war as in countries fighting one another, but also war as a metaphor for contest. It is only through competition that a winner can be identified, a kind of justice where the more capable prevails over the weaker and hence receive their due reward. Since competition is the force that drives innovation and progress, peacemongers are mistaken that pacification is best, since it will only lead to stagnation and subsequent extinction. Graham gives a more metaphysical reading of Proposition 25, focused on its first part on war as progenitor, and Proposition 27. Conflicting powers of opposites, including those of elemental bodies, make possible the world and all its variety. Without that conflict, we would have only lifeless uniformity. Heterogeneity and difference can lead to conflict. Existence is hence predicated upon conflict, because if there was only homogeneity, there may be no conflict, but there will also be a loss of vitality. On nature. 28. There is exchange of all things for fire, and of fire for all things, as there is of wares for gold, and of gold for wares. Heraclitus believed that fire is the arche, the principle of reality, the stuff that everything else comes from. From fire comes all things, and all things can dissolve back into the elemental fire. His choice of fire fits with his metaphysics of flow, since fire is unstable compared to the other elements of earth, water, and air, representing change and needing fuel to continue to remain in existence. Hegel suggests that Heraclitus did not really believe that everything is made from fire, but chose it as a metaphor. Hegel writes, "The existent absolute principle cannot with him come forth as a definite and actual thing such as water, but must be water in alteration or as process only." We know today that fire is not a substance at all, more a process of burning than the fuel it burns. 29. This universe, which is the same for all, has not been made by any god or man, but it always has been, is, and will be an ever-living fire, kindling itself by regular measures and going out by regular measures. Heraclitus posits a cosmogony where the universe has always been existent. It undergoes continuous creation and destruction. 30. He calls it craving and satiety. 31. It throws apart and then brings together again. It advances and retires. Desire drives one to satisfy one's desire, and when it is sated, marks a temporary reprieve before it needs to be fed again. Movement is the essence of existence. Like the elemental fire, life is ever in motion. New desires will arise that will need its own satiation. Old desires will rekindle, needing satiation once more. Waxing and waning and waxing and waning, change, movement, is the fundamental state of existence. 32. The transformation of fires, first sea, and of sea half becomes earth, and half the lightning flash. 33. When earth has melted into sea, the resultant amount is the same as there had been before sea became earth. From fire comes water, earth, and energy. Heraclitus seems to have stated the principle of conservation of mass in Proposition 33. A thing can only emerge when the nature of its elements have died. By death is meant a sea change, since when something changes a lot, it no longer is what it was before, just like how a dead person differs from the person when alive. 34. Fire lives in the death of earth, air in the death of fire, water in the death of air, and earth in the death of water. And water is the death of earth, and air is the death of water, and fire of air, and so in reverse. Earth changes to fire, changes to air, changes to water, changes to earth, changes to water, changes to air, changes to fire, is the law-like sequence of metamorphosis Heraclitus proposes, which is not exactly a backward and forward sequence, since earth does not become fire when the sequence reverses. It is odd that he began with earth, since fire is the arche. Perhaps his point is that the transmutations of the elements are reversible. Hegel considers the first half as the way upwards, a process of differentiation and creation leading to being, while the latter half as the way downwards, a process of destruction leading to non-being. He concludes that nature is thus a circle. Graham comments, the mutual transformations of matter are not an accidental feature, but the very essence of nature. Without change, there would be no world. 35. The thunderbolt pilots all things through all things. If existence is not viewed as objects, but instead as energy, then it is energy that causes all things to become what they become, as the agent of change. 36. The sun is, as Heraclitus states, not only new each day, but forever continually new. Things are changing constantly, and so they are in fact not the same things as a moment ago, but are continuously new things. What is then a thing? Defining a thing is only a difficulty if we consider things to be static and unchanging. If we think instead of things as processes, then this difficulty disappears. 37. The sun is the breadth of a man's foot. Consider a person lying down and blocking the sun out with one's foot. If the width of the foot is sufficient to block out the sun, then since we know the distance between the eyes and from the eyes to the foot, we can work out the distance to the sun geometrically. Heraclitus predates Euclid, and so such an observation is astute. Heraclitus could merely mean that the size of things we observe are deceptive, since an object as large as the sun can be blocked by something as small as one's foot. What our senses tell us may not be what the truth is. 38. If there were no sun, the other stars would not suffice to prevent its being night. 39. The boundary line of evening and morning is the bear, and opposite the bear is the boundary of bright Zeus. 40. The fairest universe is but a heap of garbage piled up at random. If we consider Proposition 38 and 39 to be astronomical observations of the cosmos, Proposition 40 will be a repudiation. What appears like order is merely the results of random processes. Restated, from random beginnings can emerge an orderly universe. 41. Every beast is driven to pasture by a blow. Just like how war is seen by Heraclitus as an important precursor to progress, pain is an important driver to get things going, akin to how necessity is the mother of invention. On the spiritual. 42. You could not discover the limits of soul even if you traveled by every path in order to do so. Such is the depth of its meaning. The soul is profound and limitless. Hence we are unable to get to the bottom or end of it. Graham notes that Heraclitus views the soul as the moral and cognitive center of human experience. 43. Soul is the vaporization out of which everything else is composed. Moreover, it is the least corporeal of things and is in ceaseless flux, for the moving world can only be known by what is in motion. Heraclitus in Proposition 28 said that fire is the basis and now writes that the soul is the basis of all things, even though it is immaterial. Perhaps Hegel is right to say that Heraclitus's fire is only a metaphor to represent process. The soul is constantly changing. Because like can only be known by like, since the world is constantly changing, the soul which is also constantly changing can know it. 44. Souls are vaporized from what is moist. Soul can only come from what is alive, and what is alive has some content of water. 45. Soul has its own inner law of growth. Souls do not obey the physical laws, since it is not a physical thing, but has its own law, growing not from physical food, but from spiritual food. 46. A dry soul is wisest and best. The best and wisest soul is a dry beam of light. Yet paradoxically, even though the soul emerges from the moist, the living, it can be rarefied into a dry state of pure energy, pure fire, if we consider dry to mean fiery as suggested by Hegel. 47. Souls take pleasure in becoming moist. We live in the death of souls, and they in our death. To animate a body, souls have to change from its original state. Even though it has to change, it delights in becoming a part of life. When the body dies, souls return to their original state of pure energy. 48. A drunken man has to be led by a boy, whom he follows stumbling and not knowing whither he goes, for his soul is moist. Heraclitus tells us a healthy soul is dry, and hence a soul that is wet is unhealthy. Thus, he seems to judge drunkenness as bad behavior. An impure soul has to be led by a purer soul, even if he does not know where he will be led to and follows with difficulty. 49. It is death to souls to become water, and it is death to water to become earth. Conversely, water comes into existence out of earth and souls out of water. Though change is a kind of death to the original state, it brings about a new thing. 50. Even the sacred barley drink separates when it is not stirred. When undisturbed, things can revert to their original states. 51. It is hard to fight against impulsive desire. Whatever it wants, it will buy at the cost of the soul. When we give in to our desires, difficult as it may be to not give in, it comes at a price. Our soul becomes changed. 52. It would not be better if things happen to man just as they wish. Actions have consequences. Overall, the state of affairs may be worse if all our desires are fulfilled, and so we should be mindful of the impact on the total when considering what it is that we want. 53. It is better to hide our ignorance. If one keeps quiet, others may be uncertain of one's intelligence. However, once one begins speaking, it may become clear that one is a fool. This aphorism is suitable for our current times where there is a prevalence of oversharing on social media. 54. A foolish man is a flutter at every word. Harris explains, one must stop and think about things and not go into wild enthusiasm or confused thought. It will be foolish to get too excited over everything. 55. Fools, although they hear, are like the deaf. To them the adage applies that when present they are absent. If one hears but does not understand, then it is tantamount to not having heard at all. A suitable continuation may be how a little knowledge, when possessed by fools, is a dangerous thing. 56. He said, bigotry is the sacred disease and self-conceit tells lies. Bigotry is a prejudice against others, such as racial or sex discrimination, based on characteristics not chosen by the victims. It is induced by self-conceit, by thinking oneself better than others, though it is not justified. It is indeed a sickness based on untruth, which is what Heraclitus is against, since he stands for getting to the truth of all things in his metaphysical investigations. 57. Most people do not take heed of the things they find, nor do they grasp them even when they have learned about them, although they think they do. Heraclitus makes a psychological observation that people fail to recognize the truth of things, sometimes even after learning more about them. Instead, they may think they know when they do not, which Harris considers to be the ultimate error and blindness. 58. If all existing things were smoke, it is by smell that we would distinguish them. 59. In Hades, souls perceive by smelling. Heraclitus had, in Proposition 12, pointed out that the eyes are better witnesses than our ears. Our sensory apparatus is suited to our needs to function in this material world, just like if the objects were smells, our nose would then be the sensory organ of choice, the way they are for dogs. In a world of darkness such as Hades, our eyes will be useless, while our nose will be the main sensory organ we would have to depend on. We should, however, recall that he said in Proposition 13 that eyes and ears are bad witnesses to men having barbarian souls. We need to refine ourselves spiritually and intellectually so as to be better able to think in a sound way, which will be a virtue following Proposition 10. 60. Corpses are more fit to be thrown out than dung. A dead body is no longer that person since it lacks life. Harris suggests that Heraclitus has a disdain for elaborate funeral rituals since it gives unwarranted attention to what is effectively no longer the person. On the divine. 61. Human nature has no real understanding, only the divine nature has it. On our own, we have no knowledge. What knowledge we do have is what we have gotten from the divine. Harris suggests that the divine here is not referring to the gods but to a world mind, a cosmic consciousness. 62. Man is not rational. there is intelligence only in what encompasses him. Following from Proposition 61, what encompasses us is the cosmic consciousness from which we have received our rationality through participating in that consciousness. Harris, however, reads it here differently, writing, "He must mean that man is not automatically endowed with reason or logic, which is slowly built up in a society by small increments. Indeed, our knowledge is not entirely from within us, but is also what we gain from the society we live in, which represents an accumulation of culture and knowledge from which we can draw from." 63. What is divine escapes man's notice because of their incredulity. Incredulity is an inability or unwillingness to believe in something. Heraclitus certainly believes in gods, referring to Zeus and of how fire contains its own gods in Proposition 74. If the divine here are the gods of the Greek pantheon, then the statement would mean we fail to notice the divine because we do not believe in God or lack faith. If his meaning was how the divine can be found in fire, in the elements, or in the cosmos, then we can understand the statement to mean that by being aware of the transcendent, we may then notice the divine in things around us. 64. Although intimately connected with the Logos, which orders the whole world, men keep setting themselves against it, and the things which they encounter every day seem quite foreign to them. Our existence is ordered by the principles of reality, but by not carrying out our lives in accordance to these principles, we alienate ourselves. 65. As in the night time a man kindles for himself a light, so when a living man lies down in death with his vision extinguished, he attaches himself to the state of death, even as one who has been awake lies down with his vision extinguished and attaches himself to the state of sleep. 66. Immortals become mortals, mortals become immortals. They live in each other's death and die in each other's life. 67. There await men after death such things as they neither expect nor have any conception of. Heraclitus compares being awake with being alive and being asleep with being dead. When awake and alive, our senses are functioning, while when asleep and dead, they are not. However, this is only a small glimpse of what death is like, since he tells us that we will experience after death what we did not expect and even have any conception of, implying that he does believe in an afterlife. I read Proposition 66 as speaking of reincarnation. If we continue living in an afterlife, then we are essentially immortal in that realm. When we reincarnate, we then become mortal, with the immortal side of us dying so that we can descend to the material realm. Hegel adds, the divine is the rising through thought above mere nature, which belongs to death. 68. They arise into beingness and become guardians of the living and the dead. It is unclear who they refers to. If it is the soul in the afterlife, then this soul comes into being after being released from the body and cares for the living as well as the dead. If it is the living Heraclitus refers to, then we are born into this world and cares for both the living and the dead also. 69. A man's character is his guardian divinity. If we employ a religious reading, we can think of a daemon like Socrates, which cautions him when he is about to do something wrong. If not, we can read this to mean that our character is akin to a spiritual force guiding us. It defines who we are and how we are likely to act. 70. Greater dooms win greater destinies. Graham translates doom as death. A great death can be like a death arising from an act of heroism given the warring culture of Heraclitus' time. If one is willing to die for a great cause, then one can reap greater rewards while alive. The milder modern idiom is nothing ventured, nothing gained. 71. The most reliable man understands reliable things and guards them, and justice will overtake fabricators of lies and false witnesses. 72. Fire in its progress would catch all things by surprise and judge them. 73. How can anyone hide from that which never sets? 74. When visitors unexpectedly found Heraclitus warming himself by the cooking fire, he said, "Here too are gods." To be reliable, one requires reliance on what is reliable. Once one realizes what those are, one should take care of and protect those reliable things in order to be able to call on them when needed. Heraclitus seems to be assuming that ultimately justice will prevail, which is a metaphysical view since it is not corroborated by empirical evidence, as we see crime go unpunished, evil people doing well, and good people doing poorly. He may have a view of reincarnation as alluded to in Proposition 66, where one's karma catches up with them, or that there is a supreme judge which he considers to be the elemental fire in Proposition 72, which will dish out just deserts. This elemental fire is always present in everything since it is the source of everything, and so it knows everything, as there are gods within the elemental fire. 75. They cleanse themselves with others' blood, as if someone were to wash himself by walking in shit, were to cleanse himself with shit. It would seem madness to observe such a man who is acting this way. And they pray to images, much as if they were talking to temple edifices, for they do not know what gods and heroes are. Heraclitus derides certain ritualistic practices such as animal or human sacrifice and praying to images. To think that one can purify oneself through the sacrifice of another being makes no sense to him, since he chooses to consider what is literally happening, of the spilling of blood, rather than its symbolic significance of the sacrifice of another as penance. Similarly, he criticizes the worship of images, which is fair if the worshipper indeed mistakes the image to be God itself, rather than just a symbolic representation. 76. With night walkers, magicians, bacchantes, revelers, and participants in the mysteries, what are regarded as mysteries among men are unholy rituals. Their processions and their phallic hymns would be disgraceful exhibitions were it not that they are done in honor of Dionysus. But Dionysus, in whose honor they rave and hold revels, is the same as Hades. Harris postulates that Heraclitus is here attacking the mystery religions of ancient Greece, which hold an important place in Greek life. An important part of the philosophical turn is a shift from religious belief to rational thought, which finds its beginnings with pre-Socratic enquiry, though it is a gradual transition and not an abrupt disavowal, since references to God continue to permeate their thinking, though sometimes in a critical fashion. 78. The Sibyl with raving mouth utters solemn, unadorned, unlovely words, but she reaches out over 1,000 years with her voice because of the God within her. Sibyls are oracles in the Greek temples. What they may say may not be pretty, but has great impact because it conveys the words of the gods. Truth might likewise be hard to swallow, but yet important to accept because it is the truth. Counsels. 80. Thinking is common to all. Is Heraclitus here positing animism, where even non-living objects contain consciousness? Harris interprets Proposition 80 as there being a background of cosmic consciousness in which all things both living and non-living participate. 81. Man should speak with rational mind and thereby hold strongly to that which is shared in common, as a city holds onto its laws, and even more strongly. For even more strongly all human laws are nourished by the one divine law, which prevails as far as it wishes, suffices for all things, and yet somehow stands above them. Graham notes that Heraclitus views good laws as being reflections of universal principles. He has a conception of natural law, laws which specify how nature operates as devised by the divine and hence should be obeyed. Using our rationale, we can discover these natural laws and then formulate societal laws based on them to govern our states, hence maintaining a strong rational basis for our laws. 82. The people should fight for their law as for their city wall. What constitutes a people goes beyond the physical manifestations of its identity, such as city walls or land. Their values, as embodied in their laws, are a vital constituent of their identity and guides their way of life. 83. Law involves obeying the counsel of one. This can be interpreted as the ruler, the Hobbesian Leviathan that has to be obeyed because of his monopoly of force. Though Harris reads the One as similar to the Neoplatonic One, or the cosmic consciousness or God, which governs all things. 84. One man is worth 10,000 if he is first rate. 85. The best of men choose one thing in preference to all else, immortal glory in preference to mortal good, whereas the masses simply glut themselves like cattle. 86. Gods and men honor those slain in battle. While Proposition 84 may be considered elitist today, ancient Greece does not have such mores as a stratified aristocratic slave-owning society, as Plato and Aristotle will reinforce later. Heraclitus will only be expressing what is considered a norm, that a very capable person is worth many mediocre ones, since he, by himself, will be able to do what it ordinarily takes 10,000 to do. But by worth, he is clearly not referring just to employment in the workplace. In Proposition 85 and 86, he is referring to life and death. Read together with Proposition 84, he will mean that the life of one first-rate man is worth the death of many mediocre ones. According to him, the first-rate will choose immortal glory versus the temporal pleasures that life affords us. The latter is what ordinary people and also animals pursue. And he tells us what is immortal glory in 86, which is to die in war, since human beings and even the gods will honor them. Given our current disdain for war, perhaps we can interpret what Heraclitus meant by war instead as worthy causes, which the first rate will prefer to pursue compared to mere temporal pleasures. 87. Even a man who is most in repute knows and maintains only what is reputed and holds onto that information. But certainly the justice of Dicker will apprehend fabricators and false witnesses of lies. Following Harris's explanation, even a person who is held in repute is only a function of the prevailing understanding and prejudices of his time. Such understanding may be incorrect. There exists an objective truth. Hence, we ought to keep searching for it, testing even what is accepted as truth currently, hard as that may be, since we may not be able to even identify what in the current state of knowledge are only mere assumptions. In modern philosophy, it is why discourse and dialectic, which is the contest of ideas, paves the way to get to this ultimate objective truth. To problematize Heraclitus' notion that there indeed exists such an objective and definitive truth, his notion faces the challenge of the criterion. Another ancient Greek, Agrippa, who comes from circa 100 AD, will later pose his skeptical trilemma, where to justify the truth of something, we have to in the first place have a criterion for truth. But what can this criterion be based on if not truth, which we have yet to even justify since we first need a criterion? Heraclitus appeals to Dica, the Greek goddess of justice and in general to the gods, to know the truth, though truth by divine revelation comes with its own sets of problems, the first of which is that there exists a God to begin with, not to mention its omniscience. 88. To extinguish hubris is more needed than to extinguish a fire. Hubris is to think that one is better than one actually is, to think one knows what one in fact does not know for certain. Heraclitus thinks hubris is more dangerous than fire, but this presents a dilemma. To be able to act effectively, we have to act with confidence. If we have doubts about our mission, that makes it hard to act effectively, lowering our chances of success. To strike a balance between overconfidence and being overly modest will be what is required. Perhaps being well prepared, having studied and understood the situation, and from that sound understanding, equip ourselves adequately to act without over or underestimating our odds of success is how we should conduct ourselves. Once more, it is moderation, the middle way. 89. It is weariness to keep toiling at the same things so that one becomes ruled by them. When we keep working at something, we may get burned out. But the question we should ask is, why are we working at that thing? When we work at something, there is an opportunity cost. We are sacrificing the capacity to work at something else. In that way, serving that cause, or in Heraclitus' words, being ruled by that cause. To the extent that that cause is worthwhile, to toil to achieve it, to wear ourselves out to achieve it, may be worthwhile, but we should introspect and determine just how important that cause is to us, since we'll be letting it rule over us to some degree. To the extent that it is important will then be the proportionate extent that we allow it to rule us. 90. Dogs bark at a person whom they do not know. Are we the person or are we the dog in this proposition? The former will be a literal reading of the proposition, the typical beware of dog signs we see at the gates of houses. Harris's take is that we are the dog. Human and dog psychology is to dislike what is unfamiliar, what is unknown. In psychology, this is known as a status quo bias, where we prefer things to stay the same even when the situation is suboptimal because of the fear of the unknown. Heraclitus makes an observation but does not tell us in it that we should change and embrace the unknown, and wisely so, since venturing into the unknown may work out badly or well. But referring to Proposition 70, greater dooms win greater destinies, we can imagine he is on the side of adventuring or at least taking calculated risks. 91. What sort of mind or intelligence have they? They believe popular folk tales and follow the crowd as their teachers, ignoring the adage that the many are bad, the good are few. 92. Men, he says, are deceived in their knowledge of things that are manifest, even as Homer was, who was the wisest of all the Greeks. 93. Homer deserves to be thrown out of the contest and flogged, and Archilochus too. As we already know, Heraclitus is elitist. He thinks the way of the common folk is often foolish, and hence to follow the many is folly. Instead, we should look to the wise ones, which will be few, to guide us, but alas, they are sought out by few. People are misguided even over what seems clear and obvious. To prove his point, he points out how Homer, who was considered wise, was wrong over many matters as contained in his mythical tales, which do not describe reality. He thinks that such story spinners and their associates, the poets like Archilochus, should be discredited. Plato will later in The Republic want to go so far as to ban poets because he thinks they give a false account of reality since they describe the imperfect instantiations of the forms and not the forms themselves, and such false accounts will confuse the people. 94. Hesiod distinguishes good days and evil days, not knowing that every day is like every other. Superstitious or magical thinking not based on facts and reason, are harmful. Harris tells us that the Romans in their superstition name some days as good or bad, such that half the year are non-work days, marring their productivity. 95. The Ephesians had better go hang themselves, every man of them, and leave their city to be governed by youngsters, for they have banished Hermodorus, the finest man among them, declaring, "Let us not have any one among us who excels the rest. There should be such a one, let him go and live elsewhere." Ephesus is where Heraclitus hails from. He thinks they have committed a grave mistake to banish the superior among them just because they want an equality, which is not an elevation of the less able, but a denigration of the more able, leading to a society that is worse off. 96. May you have plenty of wealth, you men of Ephesus, in order that you may be punished for your evil ways. His curse of more wealth for the Ephesians is counterintuitive, since wealth is often considered a good thing. We can hence read this to mean that wealth brings its own evil, or alternatively, if one gains wealth through wrongdoings, then one will ultimately be punished for them, since he also believes in a universal justice. 97. After birth, men have the wish to live and to accept their dooms. Then they leave behind children to become dooms in their turn. As Buddha tells us as the first noble truth, all life is suffering. Even if we do not understand this, we surely have experienced its truth, since we suffer as we live. Yet we continue to bring new life into the world, and in that way bring suffering onto them, the very children we declare our love and care for. This is of course a pessimistic view. This paradoxical universe. 98. Opposition brings concord. Out of discord comes the fairest harmony. Competition, contestation of ideas, war, and fights are seen by Heraclitus as necessary to bring about progress. Modern thinkers like Hegel will talk about the dialectical method, a process where opposing ideas find synthesis or reconciliation to bring us closer to truth. Indeed, Hegel pays tribute to Heraclitus for his historical approach to philosophy and credits Heraclitus with the conceptual form of the dialectic. He writes, "Here we see, Len, there is no proposition of Heraclitus which I have not adopted in my logic." Let us consider an example of the dialectical process by Hegel. We begin with the thesis, being. Then its antithesis subsequently arises, non-being, as dissatisfaction with the thesis of being grows. As dissatisfaction with the opposing thesis of non-being grows, the next stage is not a reversion to the original thesis of being, but instead taking the best parts of both are put together to form a synthesis, becoming. This synthesis of becoming is particularly fitting when considering Heraclitus as a process philosopher, since it is precisely not the fixity of being and given essences that characterizes things in a substance metaphysics, but the constant becoming that is a more accurate characterization of things according to process philosophy. Hegel also extends the Heraclitean understanding of opposition to how the identity of one thing contains what is opposed to it. We can only define a thing by contrast. Each particular only is, insofar as its opposite is implicitly contained in its notion, he writes. Bernard Mandeville's The Fable of the Bees tells us that if each bee acts for their own self-interest, what seems oppositional, discordant, leads to a thriving hive, and that idiom is also adopted by Adam Smith in his conception of the invisible hand, where participants of a market acting selfishly lead to the most efficient market system. If by harmony Heraclitus is referring to music, a piece of music relies on dissonance to lead to a satisfying resolution. In short, challenge and opposition is not necessarily a bad thing if you can understand it as an impetus for improvement. 99. It is by disease that health is pleasant, by evil that good is pleasant, by hunger satiety, by weariness rest. It is only by contrast that we can appreciate the good. If there was no relativity between things, we may be insensible to their goodness, as in his examples of health being appreciated only because we know or experience sickness. We will not know the pleasure of quenching one's thirst or sating one's hunger and the pleasure of rest after hard work. In that way, life actually becomes ironically less pleasurable if there was only the good. Men would not have known the name of justice if these things had not occurred. If there was no injustice, there will also be no justice, since it will not be needed. Later thinkers like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz will speak of higher order goodness leading to the best of all possible worlds, such as the need for poverty in order to have the higher order goodness of charity. Voltaire will lampoon such a notion in his scolding satire, Candide. Is this the dialectical process at work that Heraclitus himself alludes to? 101. Seawater is at once very pure and very foul. It is drinkable and healthful for fishes, but undrinkable and deadly for men. Coming up is a series of aphorisms that Heraclitus reports as fact, but obviously he is pointing at something non-factual. What is good or bad is relative to persons and situations. To the robber, robbing the victim successfully is good. To the victim, being robbed is bad. Often, some policies are good for one group and bad for another group. For instance, welfare for the unemployed is good for the unemployed, but someone needs to pick up the bill, such as the taxpayer. Even what is good at one point in time, such as vigorous exercise for the young person, may be deadly for the same person when old. 102. Donkeys would prefer hay to gold. What one considers valuable is likewise relative. If you are dying of thirst, a small cup of water may be worth to you more than kilograms of gold. Luxury has warped the value of things. For instance, luxury shoes, which may be far less comfortable to wear, are considered more valuable than cheaper but more comfortable shoes. A luxury mechanical watch is far less accurate than a cheap digital one, yet is far more expensive. Similar t-shirts, one with a brand logo and one without, are valued differently. What we need is different from what we want. However, to argue against Heraclitus, luxury watches or branded clothes are valued not for their intrinsic value as gadgets of time or garments for modesty, but as signals to other people of one's status. They do serve a function over the basic function, sometimes to the extent of losing the basic function. For instance, a luxury watch that is so complicated that it is hard to read the time. 103. Pigs wash in mud and domestic fowls in dust or ashes. What each species needs is different, just as what each person needs may differ. What may be considered dirty for one may be the cleansing agent for another. 104. The handsomest ape is ugly compared with humankind. The wisest man appears as an ape when compared with a god, in wisdom, in beauty, and in all other ways. 105. Man is regarded as childish by a spirit, just as a boy is by a man. Even the best members of a lesser species can be inferior in certain characteristics compared to the average member of a higher species. Heraclitus refers to beauty and wisdom, though it can also cut the other way. The strongest man is probably weaker than the average ape. The fastest man is slower than the average cheetah. However, if we take his point not as a comparison between animals and human beings, but human beings to God, then what a human being can know, can do, and in her virtues, pale in comparison to a God, or as he reminds us, even to a spirit. 106. To God, all things are beautiful, good, and right. Men, on the other hand, deem some things right and others wrong. What is bad for a specific person may be, in the bigger scheme of things, good. For instance, a law prohibiting begging is bad for the poor, but may be beneficial for society as a whole. Taking this to the level of the absolute whole, there may be in fact no bad things whatsoever, since even bad things may have good repercussions. Heraclitus already talked about how war is the father of all things, and how opposition leads to concord. However, such moral relativism is problematic to morality, since it seems to suggest that what is bad is in fact good, making all acts immoral. 107. Doctors cut, burn, and torture the sick, and then demand of them an undeserved fee for such services. They are treating the same things, the good cures and diseases. Sometimes the cure has worse effects than the disease. The second line can be read cynically or wittily. By having to pay a lot, the fee cures the sick of wanting to seek treatment. 108. The way up and the way down are one and the same. Let us first consider the literal meaning. A staircase between two floors can be taken in the upward direction starting from the first floor, or the downward direction starting from the second floor. Up and higher are typically seen as better, while down and lower to be worse. I suppose then that Proposition 108 can be interpreted to mean that we can choose the moral way upwards or the immoral way downwards. However, the literal reading tells us that where we go depends on where we start. If one is already at the rooftop, there is only one direction to go, which is down. If one is on the ground floor, the only way is up. Or they can remain where they are, but they cannot go any higher or lower respectively. Is progress or degeneration then praised or blameworthy respectively, since they really are just motions on the same path? Harris's reading is that Heraclitus is indicating a unity of opposites, where opposing poles are in fact the same. 109. In the circumference of the circle, the beginning and the end are common. Harris's reading of Proposition 108 may be justified here, where the end and the beginning, while seeming to be opposite poles, are the same point in the circle. 110. Into the same rivers we step and do not step. We exist and we do not exist. We step and we do not step. We exist but we do not exist, because the concept of we is problematic. The I of one moment ago is no longer the same I of a later moment, since in the meantime I have changed. I am no longer the same I. This problem is alleviated if we adopt a process view of reality. 101. For the wool carder, the straight and the winding way are one and the same. A wool carder is a person who straightens the raw wool with a card or comb so that it can be put into the machine to generate the thread. As far as the wool carder is concerned, whether the raw wool is straight or twisted, she will have to apply the card to it. Or the machine spinning the thread, whether its output is straight or wound around a spool, the wool carder is indifferent, since her job is just applying the card to the raw wool. I read this as, we have to live our lives, regardless of what circumstances we were thrown into. 112. Joints are at once a unitary whole and not a unitary whole. To be in agreement is to differ. The concordant is the discordant. From many things comes oneness, and out of oneness comes the many things. Joints are composed of a few parts, but as a joint, it is one object. The parts of a joint differ from one another, but they fit together to form a unified joint. The parts are required to be different so as to form the cohesive joint. Whether to consider it one or many depends on the stage of assembly or disassembly. A collection of disparate things can be considered one collection, and when the items are taken separately, many things. Just like a person has one body, but this body can be decomposed into so many cells, and these cells all together constitute the body. Unity or multiplicity is merely a matter of perspective. We can view a society as one united body or as a multiplicity of individuals. Which perspective we adopt depends what we are trying to do with that perspective conceptually. What seems different from one perspective may be the same from another perspective, and vice versa. 113. It is one and the same thing to be living and dead, awake or asleep, young or old. The former aspect in each case becomes the later, and the latter becomes the former, by sudden, unexpected reversal. The same person is at one moment alive, another moment dead, one moment awake, and another asleep, at one time young, and at a later time old. A sleeping person can awaken, and a person awake can fall asleep. If we accept a doctrine of reincarnation, the dead can come alive, and when they do, they become young again. What is in one state may change into its seemingly opposite state. Hesiod, whom so many accept as their wise teacher, did not even understand the nature of day and night, for they are one. Graham explains, in his myths, Hesiod treats day and night as separate persons, taking turns travelling abroad while one remains at home. But this fails to capture the interconnectedness of day and night and falsifies reality. What seems separate in one perspective may from a different perspective be the same thing. A more modern example discussed by Gottlob Frege is how the morning star and the evening star refer to the same planet, Venus. 115. The name of the bow is life, but its work is death. The Greek word for bow and life are the same word, but ironically, the bow brings not life but death. As Harris observes, this is not quite a philosophical argument for the unity of opposites. 116. The hidden harmony is better than the obvious. It may be more interesting for a musician and her listeners to play and listen to a more complex and hence more hidden harmony than a simple harmony. Likewise, a complex reality may be more interesting than a simple one, if we accept that what is interesting is better. Sometimes what is simpler may be better. For instance, a simpler mechanism that has the same function is better than a complex one, because less parts or complexity means less chance of breaking down. Or as William of Ockham would tell us, a simpler theory is preferable to a more complex one if it has the same explanatory power. 117. People do not understand how that which is at variance with itself agrees with itself. There is a harmony in the bending back, as in the cases of the bow and the lyre. The strings seem to be at variance with the body of the bow and lyre. However, such a tension is precisely what causes these instruments to work as intended. I am reminded of Graham's earlier observation in Proposition 20, where some things, such as rivers, are precisely what they are because they contain change. A river is only a river if its contents, the waters, are flowing. Otherwise, it will be a pond or a lake. Likewise, a bow or a lyre needs to maintain its two oppositional elements of string and body in tension to fulfill its function. We sometimes need tension or stress to perform better, though if the stress is too much, we, the bow and the lyre, may break. A boxer needs an opponent to fight, otherwise he cannot improve. A thinker needs challenges to his ideas so he can refine them. If there are no opponents, we may have an obvious harmony as in proposition 116, but if we have opponents, there may be a hidden harmony which on the surface may appear to be at odds with each other but ends up creating a better harmony. 118. Listening not to me but to the Logos, it is wise to acknowledge that all things are one. We should not accept knowledge based on authority, but instead based on reason. Heraclitus has talked about how from one comes all things, and from all things come one. So he is expressing a doctrine of holism, something later on argued for more exhaustively by Spinoza and F.H. Bradley. 119. Wisdom is one and unique. It is desires, and yet does not desire the name of Zeus. Harris explains, Heraclitus seems quite clear about keeping philosophy and religion in two separate camps, often censuring popular religious practices as foolish or even evil, yet at the same time recognizing that there is something in thought that calls for a higher kind of mind. 120. Wisdom is one, to know the intelligence which steers all things through all things. The cosmic consciousness is what connects all things to one another. 121. God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, satiety. But he undergoes transformations, just as fire, when combined with incenses, is named according to the particular aroma which it gives off. Within the absolute or totality are all things and all phenomena, and whatever seeming contradictions are resolved at the level of the absolute, a doctrine elaborated by Bradley. Yet within this oneness arises a multiplicity, since the elemental fire can transform into all things which are differentiated from one another by our senses, just as these things can transform back into the elemental fire. 122. The sun will not overstep his measures. If he were to do so, the Irenaeus, fiends of justice, would seek him out for punishment. There is a natural order and balance in the universe, and even the sun, which is considered a great force, even a god, has to abide by it. What more mere mortal beings like ourselves who will be punished if we overstep? 123. The seasons which carry all things along. Time is the abstract representation of process, of all flow, all movement, all becoming. 124. Even sleepers are workers and collaborators in what goes on in the universe. Harris explains, since everything in the world is a part of the total cosmos, a passive participant is just as much a participant as an active one. Just as how within the flux can come segments of stillness and stability as in proposition 23, rest is a part of the continuous movement in the interconnected universe. 125. Of things which involve sight, hearing and knowledge, these I especially respect. In proposition 11, he wrote, the things of which there can be sight, hearing and learning, these are what I especially prize. Here, Heraclitus switched to knowledge, metasis, which Harris notes can also be translated as understanding. Heraclitus has emphasized that understanding is more important than learning in proposition 6, and knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing in proposition 7. Part of wisdom is learning and understanding what is learned, but within it will also be searching within oneself as in proposition 8, temperance, virtue, and acting appropriately in line with nature as in proposition 10. And so you have it, the complete fragments of Heraclitus along with my commentary. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.